Histology, we're going to move on to the digestive system, or the gastrointestinal system, if you want to go by what is on the figure here. To me, this one a little bit more involved. We have a few more organ types, so it's a few more things to take a look at and understand what they are. Again, if we're actually just looking at the system here, we're looking at mainly the alimentary canal is what we refer to it as. So this is what the food actually passes through. So it's going to be kind of the different layers of this, and then the different tubes that the actual food bolus or chyme is going to be passing through. So we're going to look at the esophagus. So this first one, do a little introduction about the layers of the actual alimentary canal, and then we'll take a look at the esophagus. After that, we'll work our way through some of the other organs in this. After that, we'll look at the accessory organs of the digestive tract in the next chapter. So like I said, the digestive tract, or the alimentary canal, is really what the food / chyme is going to be passing through. So this is going to be the oral cavity, the esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, obviously out through the rectum and anus. There will be a few other things that we'll take a look at in a subsequent set of material here, which will be those accessory organs. So organs that are part of the digestive process but are not necessarily having the food travel through them. So things like salivary glands, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, and what's going on with those. So you can kind of see it on this one right here. You can see accessory digestive organs on the left side of the screen, the gastrointestinal tract, or the GI tract / alimentary canal on the right. Again, we're going to look at some of these main things here. We've kind of looked at some of the oral cavity stuff on and off here. We know it's stratified squamous, it's a mucous membrane. So we're going to be looking a little bit more at the esophagus and the actual digestive organs. So today we'll just take a look at the layers of the GI tract that we're going to see that are present in everything of the alimentary canal, but like I said, their composition will change, their epithelial subtypes, the muscle layers will change a little bit depending on where we're at and what that organ is doing. So what we're going to see is when we're really looking at the digestive tract, it's really 4 main layers that are to this. It really, the last one, the adventitia or serosa, is just whether or not it is in the peritoneal cavity. In that case, it is the serous cavity, which has serous membranes. Outside of that, everything is going to have these same basic layers throughout. So you're going to have the mucosa, which is epithelium with some areolar connective tissue underneath, and then a small smooth muscle layer detention, that just lumen area. Beneath that, we will have submucosal tissue. Again, depending on where you're at, we're going to have differences of what's found there. So you might have nerve plexuses there. There might be some glandular epithelium that's involved in that one. Beneath that layer, we're going to have 2 main layers of smooth muscle. We'll see the stomach. There's actually a 3rd layer, but that layer is called the muscularis. It is an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer of muscle going on that. And then, like I said, some connective tissue surrounding the outside, either adventitia or serosal layer. So if you look at it from the outside in, you can see the serosa, it has an epithelial membrane. The adventitia has a connective tissue without the epithelial membrane. You can see the black here is that the muscle of this one, the muscularis. Beneath that is that submucosa right here, and then you're going to see we have the different layers of the mucosal membrane within this. And again, we'll talk about all those a little bit in more detail. This is just trying to give you a general idea to start with. So you can see a little bit better on the actual cartoon image here. Again, you can see the mucosa is going to be the epithelium, some underlying connective tissue, and a small layer of smooth muscle. We can then see the submucosal layer, which is a lot of connective tissue, blood vessels, lymphatics, things like that. Beneath that, we have the layers of muscle, and then outside of that, that serosal / adventitial layer that would be on the outside. And again, showing you a slightly different one here. You can see down in those submucosal layers, you will get some glandular epithelium that's down there sometimes. One of the other things we're going to see is lymphatic tissue is going to be in here in certain areas as well, some of these lymph nodes. Again, we'll take a look at each of these in a little bit more detail as we take a look at it. Main thing with the mucosa, as it has 3 main layers to it, you are going to have that whatever the epithelium is, and again, depends on where we're at. We're going to see in the esophagus, it is stratified squamous epithelium. Through a lot of the rest of the digestive tract, this is going to be simple columnar. Beneath that, you have loose connective tissue, which is called the lamina propria. It's going to have blood vessels in it, capillary bed. A lot of times we'll have lymphatic capillaries in there as well. And then surrounding that, you have a thin layer of smooth muscle. It's only 3 or 4 layers of cells thick, called the Muscularis mucosa, or the Muscularis propria. And again, this is just a little bit of smooth muscle that can tension that lumen a little bit. You can see beneath that, we're going to have a much thicker layer, that muscularis layer, which has 2 different orientations to the muscle on top of being a much thicker layer. So again, depending on where we're at, it's going to depend, and again, it has to do with what are these tissues doing. We talked about this when we talked about epithelium. Certain epitheliums are going to be good at certain things. Multi-layered, lots of cells. It's good at protection. So if we look at the oral cavity, the esophagus, the anal canal areas where you could have mechanical abrasion, damage, if you don't chew a Dorito well enough, as we've talked about before, that stratified squamous is protective for that. So we see it in these areas that are not doing a lot of digestion, and in reality aren't doing any absorption either. As we get further down, we're going to see the stomach, small intestine, and really most of the large intestine is going to have simple columnar. Again, sometimes with microvilli, sometimes without. The main thing in this one, lots of absorption taking place, and it makes sense that it's a type of epithelium that's much better at that. We do have sometimes these little pits that form for secretion, so there's invaginations every once in a while that let us get down a little bit deeper into this gland. You can get like this glandular, like a simple duct that's going down. And we have different cells that can, in the case of the stomach, release hydrochloric acid, release enzymes. Small intestine, similar idea, release enzymes. The other thing is sometimes we'll get these finger-like extensions called villi that increase surface area that help with absorption along with those microvilli. Underneath this, we have really areolar connective tissue underneath the epithelium. It's called the lamina propria. Lots of blood vessels, lots of lymphatic vessels, sometimes some lymphatic tissue in there, especially when we get to, let's say, the ileum. We're going to have a lot of this present in there. They actually get their own little name called Peyer's patches. It's one of the ways we differentiate that from other stuff. And then we have a thin layer of smooth muscle as part of the bottom part of that mucosa called the Muscularis mucosae. Again, this is not part of that Muscularis externa. It's not present in the mouth, it's not present in the anus, but through the rest of the canal it is. And again, just lets that lumen area have a little bit of ability to tension the muscle, open it up, relax it, constrict it a little bit. Beneath that is the submucosa. So some loose, some dense connective tissue in there. Lots of blood supply, lots of nerve supply, lots of lymphatics. All that's going to be present in there. This is where most of the wiring and plumbing is taking place for the digestive tract, if you want to think about it that way. Underneath that layer, is working from the lumen out, is going to be the Muscularis externa. Again, this is an inner circular layer, an outer longitudinal layer. So if you're looking at it, here's the tube. This inner layer would be the fibers would be traveling this direction. We then have an outer layer with the fibers traveling perpendicular to that. Up and down there, again, allows us to do a lot of these digestive movements, things like peristalsis, segmentation. Again, this is all wired by the autonomic nervous system. Mainly the parasympathetic is going to increase activity in this. And again, this is what's going to help move that bolus, chyme, whatever else we're calling it at that point, through the digestive tract. One of the things we'll see, the stomach, because it does a lot more segmentation and it's involved a lot with like churning and trying to do what's called mechanical digestion, the physical breakdown of this food a little bit more. It does have a third oblique layer to it. So it has that inner circular, that outer longitudinal, but inside of both of those, you actually have an oblique layer. And then we have certain areas where we need some voluntary control, generally at the start of the alimentary canal, and at the end, we have some voluntary muscle that's going to be intermixed within the smooth muscle. And again, that's about being able to trigger the swallowing. And at the other end, it's obviously about being able to relax and let a bowel movement happen. And again, oral cavity, because it is all voluntary up in the mouth there, it is not any smooth muscle there. That is more skeletal muscle in the areas where we have it. Again, that outer layer, adventitia, is going to be these areas where it is not within the peritoneum. It's loose connective tissue without that mesothelial lining. It's simple squamous epithelial lining. The serosa is within the peritoneum. It has a simple squamous epithelium covering the outside of it. That is the big difference between a serosa and adventitia. So what we'll do on this first one here is we'll take a look at the esophagus and just see what's going on there. Then, like I said, a lot of these other organs, we'll take a look at those in their own distinct little shows here. So the esophagus, the mucosa, is going to be that non-keratinized stratified squamous. That's stuff we kind of talked about when we looked at epithelium of being a mucous membrane. Within that lamina propria, you may see some lymphatic tissue. You definitely see a few mucus glands as we get closer to the stomach. And the muscularis mucosa is pretty typical. It's the inner circular layer, the outer longitudinal layer. One of the things that we do see that's a little bit different here, and I generally don't make you try to identify the different parts here, but if you were looking at the upper third of the esophagus, the muscle that's up there is going to be a little bit more skeletal. Middle third, you get a mix. And then that lower third, it's all smooth muscle at that point. So that's one of the things that you will see a little bit different when it comes to the muscularis, is that there is, because we need to trigger the swallowing reflex voluntarily, we do have to have some skeletal muscle involved with that. So if I was going to go to that level, you can actually identify upper, middle, and lower thirds of the esophagus. We're not going to go to that level of depth, but you can do that. So this is showing you the low power view, and the main thing you can see on the top of this image is that stratified squamous epithelium. You can see these dark circles right here are some mucus glands. You can see those are housed within that submucosal layer, and then you see the really thick layers of smooth muscle underlying that. Again, if we zoom in a little bit more, you can see the epithelium, that lamina propria underneath, the muscularis mucosa right here. That would be the end of the mucosa. Beneath that, you can see submucosa, and within that submucosa, just beneath the muscle, you can see two large mucus glands that are present there. So, and this should look familiar. We've looked at this a number of times, that stratified squamous epithelium. Within that submucosa, like I said, there is some glandular epithelium, some lymphatic tissue. Like I was saying about the muscularis, the upper third is going to be pretty much skeletal muscle. As we work our way down, it's half and half. It's a mix of those. In the middle third, obviously higher up, a little bit more skeletal. As you get to the bottom of that, more smooth muscle. And the lower third is all smooth muscle, because at that point, everything is autonomics. And again, it's adventitia, because we're not within the peritoneum. There is no simple squamous epithelial layer of that mesothelium surrounding the outer connective tissue around the esophagus. And you can see the submucosal glands. That's what I was talking about before. This zooms in on those a little bit more. Again, helping to provide a little bit of lubrication to that tube, so the stuff that's traveling down there does not get stuck. And again, we can look at the muscularis externa. You can see two different orientations. These are running perpendicular to one another. Inner circular layer, outer longitudinal layer. I'm not going to probably make you identify the differences on there, but you need to understand why sometimes if you looked at it, why you'd be seeing some like this and then some like this. So and that's the inner and outer layers, and you can see how they're different orientations. So this one's a longitudinal view. This one's a transverse view, or a cross-section of those cells. There is some nerve in here, this myenteric plexus. Not something I'm going to have you try to identify on this stuff here, but there is nerves that are helping to regulate how the movement happens with that muscularis externa. And again, it is through these myenteric plexuses that we're going to have that happening. And then you can see the connective tissue, this adventitia that's on the outside there. Again, no mesothelial lining because it's not within the peritoneum. So that is the esophagus. We'll take a look at a slide here real quick, and then we'll move on to the stomach. Here's the esophagus. Again, this one, for some reason, they have the image upside down. Doesn't always help us on this one here. But if you're looking at this one, we can see a few of the main layers right away here. You can see the epithelium along the bottom right here. We can see definitely that muscularis through the region right here. That adventitia to be here. And then what we'll do is we'll take a look and zoom in on this a little bit more. look at some of the more distinct layers here. So if we're looking at this, the main thing you can see here, you can see the epithelium along the bottom. This would be that lamina propria right here. You can see a little bit of this smooth muscle and the muscle intermixed within here. That would be that muscularis mucosa. Beneath that, we can see, as we move along here, a little bit more of that submucosa with one of those submucosal glands in this region right here. If we then move further out, you can see inner circular layer of muscle, outer longitudinal layer as we keep working our way down. And then this would be that adventitia, that connective tissue that would be out here. So again, for me in this one, being able to recognize that this is the esophagus, also being able to differentiate the different layers of the esophagus is what would be fair game.